So we've been looking at evolution and how evolution is this idea that there's been a change over time. And we've been talking about how the ultimate source of evolution is mutations. Creatures don't say, hey, I want to be a certain color. Because remember, creatures don't even know what color they are. Okay? Plants have no idea. And so this change over time happens because that there are mutations. And that mutation happened and nature said, hey, let's check it out and see. And if that mutation works, and it's an advantage for that creature, then natural selection keeps that creature alive. But if that mutation is a disadvantage, then nature gets rid of that mutation. And we've been looking at this whole idea about evidence for evolution and things that we use to kind of show this gradual change over time. And we talked about how the ultimate, or what people always talk about, is this idea of the fossil record. And we did absolute dating and radioactive dating, and one of the ways that we looked at was by comparing fossils from different rock layers. Remember, that's what we called relative dating. It doesn't really give us an age, but we assume whichever rocks are at the bottom and whichever fossils are deeper in the earth, that means that they're older. But we also mentioned how the fossil record does have periods of time where we don't have fossils. So there might have been like this mass extinction, like a comet hit the earth and things were just obliterated, or huge fires and things burned before they had a chance to settle. Or there's parts of the world like the tropical rainforest where it's just so humid that everything biodegrades and there's no fossils left behind. So for years, people have talked about fossils and comparing fossils to see how life has changed over time. But again, there's still this incomplete record with different gaps. So we have to look at other things to figure out, how can we show that evolution is occurring other than just fossils? And so this is just a classic example using fossils, and it shows the evolution of the horse. And I know that these are pictures, so it kind of gives you not a really good idea about how large these creatures are. So if you'll notice little cartoons down at the bottom, that kind of matches the pictures. So the ancestor of the horse was this little kind of like dog-looking creature. And over time, this creature didn't say, hey, I want to get bigger. Some creature was born, it had a mutation and allowed it to be a little bit larger and a little bit larger until eventually we got the horse like we have today. But a lot of times when they look at horses, they look at their foot bones. Now we know of horses as being hooves, but based on these ancient fossils, we see that at one point in time horses had toes. Okay? They have leg bones, very similar to what we have. They have feet bones, very similar, ankle bones like we have. And these creatures had toes. And at some point in time, a creature was born and the toes began to change shape. Now what you're looking at here, the pictures on the top represent their front legs and the pictures on the bottom represent their back legs. But some creature was born with a mutation and he was missing a toe. And nature's like, okay, well, look, it's not a big deal. And hey, maybe that toe didn't get caught in stuff. So that creature could run faster. It didn't have to worry about breaking a toe and it hurting so bad that it couldn't run, so a predator grabbed it. And then over time, notice a creature was born with a mutation and the toes were getting a little bit shorter other than this one big toe that we now call a hoof. And over time, just these mutations happen. And maybe since they didn't have these toes, like I said, get in the way, they didn't have to worry about getting broken. So they didn't have to worry about the pain, because if these toes got broken, they might not run as fast. So they're easier for a predator to grab hold of them. But this is just a classic example of how we can look at fossils to kind of figure out what's happened over time. But remember, these are all due to mutations. And so something else that we use to kind of figure out how evolution has happened is actual body structures. So we're going to look at something called homologous structures and analogous structures. Okay? You guys know that the root word homo means the same. So in the case of homologous structures, the scientific name says anatomically similar structures inherited from a common ancestor. If you are related closely, it makes sense that you kind of have the same parts. Think about you and your cousins, or you and your aunts and uncles. They're not your parents, they're not your brothers and sisters, but you have a common ancestor. You might share a grandparent. So y'all have similar features. Well, when we look at different creatures, and we can see, for example, everything that you have in this picture, a human, a cat, a dolphin, and a bat, all these creatures are mammals. And in homologous structures, when you look at the human arm, it looks different from a cat leg. and it looks different from a dolphin flipper, which looks different from a bat wing. So on the outside, all of these structures look different. And obviously, a dolphin flipper is used for swimming, a bat wing is used for flying, cats walk on their legs, we carry things with our arms. So on the outside, they look different and their functions are a little bit different. But if I take an x-ray of these things, as you see in this picture, they all have the same parts. And remember, that's what homologous means. Homologous means the same. So we have different creatures here. They're all mammals. They're all related. And here is scientific evidence showing that at some point in time we had a common ancestor. Because if we form the same parts, it makes sense that we had the same beginning somewhere. All the creatures in this picture have a humerus. That's that white bone you see. That's your upper arm bone. All these creatures have an ulna and a radius. That's the blue and red bone that you see. Those are the bones that we call your forearm. All of these creatures have carpals. Carpals are your wrist bones. Humans have 8 carpals per wrist. Cats have 8 carpals per wrist, a lot of them. And you can see the dolphins, they have wrist bones. Bats have wrist bones. They have a lot of the same shapes. They're held together the same way. In the case of our hand, the bones of our hand are called metacarpals. Well, we have 5 metacarpals per hand. So do cats, so do whales, and so do bats. So we all have the exact same hand bones. And then the bones of your fingers are called phalanges. Now humans have 14 phalanges per hand. That's obviously different from something like a whale or a bat, but we still all have the same finger bones. They have the same parts, the same overall shape. So with homologous structures, you might look different on the outside, like a bat's wing, a whale's flipper, and a human arm. But if I were to take an x-ray of them, they all have the same parts. That's what homologous means. So, it makes sense that if we have the same insides, that somehow we're related. Now, a bat wing is used for flying, and a butterfly's wing is used for flying. But if I take an x-ray, they don't have the same parts. That's not homologous structures. With homologous structures, these structures can be similar in arrangement and or function, but they might not look exactly the same on the outside. But when I look at them on the inside, I see all the same parts. And overall, they kind of do all have the same jobs. So like I said, you can think of them this way. They may look a little different on the outside, like a bird's wing in your arm, but when you take an x-ray, all the bones are the same. So they have the same structure, but the function might be a little bit different. Like I mentioned before, the bat's wing flies, while our arms hold on to something. So over time, due to mutations, the function might have changed, but the overall structure is the same. That's why they're called homologous structures. The structure, the parts, the things they're made of are the same. And this helps biologists group animals according to how recently they shared a common ancestor. So if you look at a shark and a dolphin, they both live in water, they both swim, they both have this fin on the back, they both have these what looks like little arm flippers or fins. So dolphins look like a fish, but their structure shows they're mammals, which leads us to the next thing we're talking about. If you look at these pictures, like I said, both of these animals have a back fin. Both of these animals have like flipper-like things where their arms would be. But there's a reason why sharks have fins and dolphins have flippers. If they have different names, that means they are made differently. So even though creatures might look alike, it doesn't mean they have the same parts. So remember with homologous body structures, homologous means the same. So the structure is the same. So if I were to take an x-ray of you, what makes you up would be the same. That is not true for a dolphin and a shark. These have what are called analogous structures. These are structures that do not have a common evolutionary origin, but they are similar. So basically what that means, it shows that functionally similar features can evolve independently of each other. In the case of homologous structures, if you look at a human arm and a bat wing, they look different on the outside, but on the inside they look the same. That's kind of the opposite of analogous structures. With analogous structures, these creatures look the same on the outside because they live in the same area or they do the same job. Like the shark and the dolphin, they both swim in water. So over time in evolution, they've started to look alike, but if I take an X-ray of them, they look different. Okay. So they might look alike on the outside and do the same thing, but they're very different if I take an X-ray. So if we go back to this picture of the dolphin and the shark, they both have what we call the dorsal fin. They both have these flippers in the front, okay. But the sharks are called fins and the dolphins are called flippers. If you're to take an X-ray of a dolphin flipper, it looks like a hand. It's got wrist bones, it has fingers. If I take an X-ray of a shark fin, there's nothing in it. Shark fins are made from cartilage. So if I were to take an X-ray, I would not see anything in them. So with homologous structures, you might look different on the outside, but if I take an X-ray, you're made from the same parts. That's what homologous structures mean. With analogous structures, you might look the same on the outside because you do the same job. Like the wing of an insect and the wing of a bird. They both fly. But if I take an X-ray, I'll see arm bones in the bird's wing, and I'm going to see nothing in the wing of the insect. Which leads us to two evolution patterns. And I just realized I spelled patterns wrong, but that's okay. You guys know me and my dyslexia. But with what's called divergent evolution versus convergent evolution. When things diverge, that means they separate. So divergent evolution, which is also called adaptive radiation, you might need to add this to your packet. This is when a species evolves into several different forms that live in different ways. So we have a common ancestor, like some creature way back when. And over time, due to mutations, it diverges. It radiates, it spreads out, it becomes different creatures. So like the cat, the human, the whale, and the bat, we're all mammals. But we have diverged, we have split to become different creatures. So divergent evolution or homologous structures are evidence of what we call divergent evolution. It's also called adaptive radiation because radiation means to spread out, and we're spreading out because we're adapting to our surroundings. But remember when we talk about evolution, creatures don't mean to adapt. This creature doesn't say, oh, I want to live in the water, so I need to have a fin that I can swim. Remember, these are all due to mutations. And just because this creature lived in the water, this mutation allowed it to become better swimmers. And so this mutation allowed it to survive in the environment that it was in. Now that's different from convergent evolution. To diverge means you become to divide. So this is where creatures who are related split off to form different groups, like the cat and the bat. We're mammals, we're the same kind of animal, but we have two very different lifestyles. That's different from what's called convergent evolution. To converge means you come together, you form a group. So in convergent evolution, unrelated organisms start to look like each other because of where you live. And this is what we call selective pressure. So this would be the shark and the whale. Okay. These creatures are not closely related. Sharks are fish. They have gills. Okay. Whales are mammals. They have lungs. Okay. But because they both live in the water, they live in the same environment, they have the same selective pressures, meaning nature selects certain body types to live in these areas. Over time, they've started to look alike, and that's what it means to converge. So analogous structures are proof of what we call convergent evolution. But again, remember, evolution is just due to mutations that have happened. These creatures did not mean for this to happen. But with divergent evolution, we have a group that because of mutations over time have separated to form different kinds of creatures. So they might look different on the outside, they live in different places, they have different jobs, but if I take an X-ray of them, they have the same parts. That's what homologous means. The opposite of that is analogous structures. These are creatures who are not related, but because they like similar things, they've come together to form a group. Their structures look alike on the outside. They have the same jobs like wings or fins and flippers. But if I take an X-ray of them, they are not the same thing. Something else we can look at when we deal with structures in evolution. Oh, here's analogous structures. Again, the wings of an insect and the wings of the bird. And like I mentioned, dolphins have flippers. Whoa, I don't even know what I was doing here. Dolphins have flippers made of bones. The bones got deleted, while sharks have fins made of cartilage. So they look alike and they do the same job, but they're structurally different. And so this is why flippers are not called fins. You guys know by now one of my favorite things to say is structure determines function. Okay. Well, a motorcycle has 2 wheels, a car has 4 wheels. We have to call them 2 different things, even though they both have wheels and they both move people, because they have different parts. Likewise, flippers and fins are both used in swimming, but they have different parts. Flippers are made from bones and fins are not. So species living in different places with similar environments have similar autonomies. Okay? This is basically their anatomy, their parts, and their behaviors, even though they're unrelated. Okay? They're exposed to similar pressures of the environment, so they involve similar characteristics. So these are your analogous structures. Again, just another review. Homologous structures have the same structure. That's what homo means. And that's because we have a recent common ancestor. So again, here's a human arm, a mouse arm, and a bat wing, all the same bones. But analogous, so on the outside they look different, but on the inside they're the same. That's the opposite for analogous structures. They have a different structure, but the same function. All of these are wings. They're all used for flying. But if I take an X-ray of them, they're going to be made differently. Now, there are some structures called vestigial structures. These are structures that we have, but we don't use anymore. But nature hasn't gotten rid of them yet. They no longer serve the function that they did in their ancestors. The presence of the organ does not affect its ability to survive, so natural selection hasn't bothered taking the time to get rid of it. For example, as you can see here in this picture, if you were to take a picture of a whale, whales have hip bones. They have hip bones just like you and I do, but they don't have legs anymore. Whales are related to hippos. They walked on land their ancestors walked on land at some point in time. So they still have their hip bones. They're not in the way. They don't do anything. And so nature doesn't take the time to get rid of it. You know, in the case of the ostrich, it's a bird. It has wings, but their wings are small and they don't use them anymore. Ostriches are known for their fast speed. They run. They're birds. They have wings and feathers and beaks, but they don't use their wings. And they probably don't use their wings because their wings are too small to handle their body weight. And so they've adapted. They've got these nice long legs and they run. And remember, these birds probably didn't say, hey, this is what I want to do. Just some ostrich was born with small wings and it had long legs and it was fast enough to run away from a predator. It didn't have to worry about flying. So even though it couldn't fly away, it was fast enough to get away, so it didn't get eaten. If it didn't get eaten, it had babies and that trait got passed on. But nature says, okay, so what? You have these little wings. They're not hurting you. They're not in the way. No point in getting rid of them. In the case of humans, your appendix. We all have an appendix. Our appendix is just this little sac where your large intestine attaches to your small intestine. In us, it doesn't work anymore. The appendix is believed to have created a chemical that helps us break down cellulose. Remember, cellulose is the sugar that makes up the cell wall of plants. And at some point in time, a creature was born with a mutation and its appendix didn't work, which actually was an advantage because without those chemicals, we can't break down cellulose. And cellulose is what you know of as fiber. And we use fiber to basically sweep out the folds of our intestines and keep our intestines clean. Metamucil, X-lax, all that is cellulose. It's fiber. And so nature actually saw the fact that our appendix didn't work as a plus. because now we have a broom to help clean out our intestines so things don't get stuck in there and rot. Well, your appendix is about the size of your pinky. For most people, it's sealed. You don't have to worry about bacteria or things getting inside of it. It's just hanging there. It's not in the way. Now, yes, in some cases, bacteria can get inside of it, and that's what appendicitis is. But in all honesty, that's not that common. And since your appendix really doesn't do anything, but it also doesn't cause a problem, nature's not going to take the time or the energy to get rid of it. You have wisdom teeth. Your wisdom teeth are vestigial. You don't need them anymore. We don't have a big jaw. And because our jaws are smaller than our ancestors, that's why we get our wisdom teeth removed. You don't have to get your wisdom teeth removed. It's just that we get our wisdom teeth removed so that they don't unalign our other teeth, which is more of a cosmetic thing. You don't have to get your wisdom teeth removed. And what's really cool is nature, there's people who are born who never even have wisdom teeth. I only had 3. I didn't have 4 wisdom teeth. So slowly, nature's kind of getting rid of that. Your coccyx bone is your tailbone. As a fetus, you had a tail. You wagged it. But it got incorporated inside of your body. It has absolutely, positively no purpose in humans. Now, in 4-legged friends, their tails actually help them with balance. But for us, we don't need them anymore. So these are examples of vestigial structures. These are structures that our ancestors once used that we don't use anymore, but nature's like, okay, so what? And so they kind of just still stick around. We can also use embryology to look at evolutionary patterns. So this here is a picture of 8 different creatures. And if you'll notice at the top, all these creatures look the same. If I were to give you these pictures, you cannot tell me which one was the human and which one was the fish. These are all examples of vertebrates. They all have a backbone. They're all in kingdom Animalia, they're animals, and they're all in phylum Chordata, which means they have a spinal cord going down their backside, and they're in subphylum Vertebrata, which means they have bone around their spinal cord. And notice in the beginning stages, all of these creatures look exactly alike. That lets us know that we're related. And then notice as time goes by, it becomes very evident that the first 2 are not as closely related as the rest of them. Because by the second stage, you can tell which 2 are going to be a fish. But looking at the rest of them, you still can't tell which one's the rabbit, which one's the human. So by looking at the first line, we know that these creatures are related because we all start developing the exact same way. By the time we get to the second grouping, again, it's evident that the first 2, which are fish and salamanders, are very different than the rest. So they're not as related as the next group. And then by the time we get to the last ones, obviously the tortoise, which is a reptile, and the chicken, which is a bird, are still different from the other 4. The pig, the calf, the rabbit, and the human, we're all mammals. So as we study embryos, we can get, with the first line, we can see that these groups are related to each other. And then by the time we let them develop a little more, we can start to see, okay, the first 2, even though these are all vertebrates, those 2 aren't as related as the other 6. And then we get to the next grouping. So we got the fish, the salamander, the tortoise, and the chick. So that half aren't as related as the last half, because the last half are all mammals. So when we try to figure out evolution and where things fit, we look at fossils. Okay? But remember, we don't have fossils for everything. And we have technology now that we never had before. So we can do things like x-rays. We can do homologous structures. We can do analogous structures. We can look at embryos. But what we tend to use mostly now is DNA. You now know that DNA is the cookbook that controls all the proteins in your body. And we now have the technology, and we can read people's cookbooks. We can read animals' cookbooks. We know all the letters. So we can now do molecular biology. Since all organisms use DNA and RNA, we can compare amino acid sequences. So for example, in this picture, all of these creatures have blood. Well, in animal blood, we have a protein called hemoglobin. And hemoglobin is the protein that makes our blood red, and it's the protein that carries oxygen. So we can look at the ingredients needed, which are the amino acids, to make hemoglobin. So we take human hemoglobin and we basically lay out all the ingredients. Okay? Remember, we figure out, we read the letters like A, T, C, G, 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 and we figure out the ingredients that we need. Remember, the ingredients are your amino acids. Then we lay them all out on the table. Then we take something like a rhesus monkey, which is a primate. It's a close relative of ours. And we lay out all of its ingredients on the table. And we notice of all the ingredients, 146 ingredients, only 8 of them are different. So out of 146 ingredients, the rhesus monkeys switches up things 8 times. Think of it this way. It's like you make a chocolate chip cookie, but you use white chocolate chips. And the monkey makes chocolate chip cookies, and it uses dark chocolate. It's still a chocolate chip cookie. You're just using different types of chocolate chips. Well, that's kind of like what's happening here. It's still making hemoglobin, but some of the ingredients are a little bit different. But notice by the time we get to a frog, which is an amphibian, it's still an animal, it's still a chordate, it's still a vertebrate. Okay? So it's related to us, but not really. Notice about half of its ingredients are different. So it still makes hemoglobin, it's still an animal like we are, but half of the ingredients it uses is different. So that's a pretty good clue that these creatures aren't as related to us as something like the rhesus monkey is.